It's a Saturday morning in 1983. You are 9 years old. Your father has loaded you, your brother, and the neighbor kid into the bed of a Ford F-150. Not in the cab, in the bed, on the wheel wells, with your backs against the cab and the tailgate down, and the highway coming up at 60 miles an hour. Nobody in your family considers this unusual. Nobody on the road considers this illegal. There is no law being violated. The wind is loud, and the road is loud, and it's one of the best mornings of your childhood. In roughly 30 states today, your father would be cited within 2 miles. In some of those states, he would be arrested. The children in the back of that truck, healthy, sunburned, completely fine, might be placed in temporary protective custody pending investigation. Everything that happened on that Saturday morning is now a crime. Here is the full list of what you survived. Start with the federal baseline because it clarifies everything that follows. As of 2026, there is no federal statute, no NHTSA standard, no federal motor vehicle safety regulation that ever explicitly prohibited children from riding in an open pickup truck bed. Not in 1983, not now. 4 states impose absolute prohibitions covering all ages under all conditions: New Jersey, New York, Arkansas, and the District of Columbia. Roughly 25 more have enacted age-based or speed-based restrictions, and approximately 20 states still have no statute at all: Alabama, Alaska, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Montana, Wyoming among them. If you live in those states, the Saturday morning ride remains entirely legal. The rest of America criminalized it gradually, state by state, mostly between 1990 and 2005, long after your childhood ended. The vehicle story doesn't begin with truck beds. It begins with seatbelts. The National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act of 1966 required manufacturers to install seatbelt hardware in new vehicles. Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 209, effective March 1967, established the installation specification. What it didn't do was require anyone to buckle in. Tennessee enacted the country's first child restraint law in January 1978. All 50 states had some version of a child restraint requirement by 1985 or 1986. Between the federal hardware mandate and the first state use requirement ran roughly a decade and a half. An entire generation of American children rode in vehicles with federally installed seatbelts that their parents were under no legal obligation to use. What eventually moved children from the front seat to the back seat wasn't a law. It was physics. As front passenger airbags became standard through the early 1990s, the force they deployed created lethal risk for children positioned in front of them. The same safety feature installed to protect adults became the reason to relocate children rearward. Legislation followed later. The airbag led. Away from the vehicle, the same compression was happening. The 1969 Nationwide Personal Transportation Survey found that approximately 48% of K to 8 grade students usually walked or biked to school. The 2009 National Household Travel Survey found 12.7%. One methodological note matters here. Both surveys measured mode of travel, not supervision status. A child walking with a parent and a child walking alone register identically in the data. The surveys didn't measure independence directly. They measured the act of walking. The directional finding is nonetheless striking. Among children living within 1 mile of school, those most likely to walk regardless, the share who walked or biked fell from 89% in 1969 to 35% in 2009, per researcher Noreen McDonald's analysis in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine. Roughly half that decline is attributable to suburban sprawl pushing children farther from schools. The rest reflects a behavioral shift that distance alone doesn't explain. In 1983, the complete supervisory architecture for a 9-year-old's Saturday afternoon was one sentence: be home when the streetlights come on. Within that sentence lived an entire geography: vacant lots, creek beds, storm drains, the gas station at the corner that sold candy without asking where your parents were, the railroad tracks a quarter mile from the cul-de-sac. None of those territories required adult presence. None of them were illegal. In 2018, the state of Utah passed a law, Utah Code Annotated Section 76-5-109.2, explicitly defining certain unsupervised child activities as not constituting neglect. walking to school unaccompanied, playing outside without an adult present. The legislature didn't grant children new rights. It carved out statutory protections for freedoms that existed unremarkably in 1983 and had been eroded since. 4 other states followed Utah. When a legislature has to write a law specifically permitting a child to walk home from school, that law is a map of exactly what was lost. The most completely documented legal transformation in this inventory is the lawn dart. A set of jarts, the dominant brand through the 1980s, consisted of 4 darts roughly 12 inches long, each with a metal or weighted plastic body and an elongated metal shaft approximately a quarter-inch in diameter, designed to penetrate ground when thrown in an overhead arc toward a target ring. The shaft penetrated other surfaces with equal efficiency. Annual sales ran between 1 and 1.5 million units before the ban. The Consumer Product Safety Commission voted to ban lawn darts on May 25, 1988. The rule was published in the Federal Register, Volume 53, number 223, on November 18, 1988. It took effect December 19, 1988, the week before Christmas. The CPSC's own findings, codified at 16 CFR Part 1306, state that commission records dating back to 1970 document at least 3 children killed by lawn dart injuries, a 4-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 13-year-old. The ban covers commercial sale and importation. It does not cover possession. The set your parents owned in 1986 remains technically legal to own. This is why jarts still appear at estate sales. The federal government determined the product had killed 3 children over roughly 2 decades, issued the ban, and that was that. The Daisy Red Ryder has been manufactured continuously since 1938. Its peak sales decade was the 1970s. Under the Gun Control Act of 1968, BB guns and air guns are classified separately from firearms and carry no federal minimum age requirement. That classification hasn't changed. Giving a 9-year-old a Red Ryder on Christmas morning was, in 1983, a specific named American ritual, unremarkable enough that a film built an entire 3rd act around it that same year. Nothing in the law changed. What changed is the context. School threat assessment protocols, zero-tolerance policies, a cultural framework in which a child carrying an air gun anywhere near a school building triggers a response calibrated for a different category of object entirely. The law is identical. The fear isn't. Children's aspirin, Bayer, St. Joseph's, was the default treatment for childhood fever through the early 1980s. Pediatricians recommended it without qualification for flu, chickenpox, and fever reduction. The connection between aspirin use in children and Reye's syndrome, a rare but serious neurological condition, was first established in research published in Pediatrics in 1980 by Karen Starko and colleagues. The American Academy of Pediatrics issued its first warning in January 1982. The U.S. Surgeon General issued an advisory the same year. The CDC's surveillance system reported approximately 555 Reye's syndrome cases at the 1980 peak. In March 1986, the FDA issued a formal regulatory requirement that all aspirin-containing products carry a Reye's syndrome warning label. Most of the case decline happened before that label, driven by the 1982 advisories and changing physician guidance. Cases fell to double digits by the late 1980s and had nearly disappeared from national reporting by the 2000s. Children's aspirin was the standard first response to a childhood fever for an entire American generation. The treatment was later found to carry real risk. The generation is, by most measures, measurably fine. The federal ban on lead paint in residential applications took effect in 1978. Every home built before that date, which includes most homes the 1980s childhood cohort grew up in, contains lead paint in subsurface layers. Intact painted surfaces pose minimal risk. Asbestos insulation in pipe wrap and ceiling tile was standard in commercial and residential construction through approximately 1980. Children who attended school in buildings constructed before 1975 spent their days in structures now subject to EPA remediation programs. The physical environment of 1980s childhood contained documented hazards that are now regulated out of existence. The generation that grew up in it's, by most measures, measurably fine. Here is what the numbers actually show. Bureau of Justice Statistics data places non-fatal violent victimization of persons ages 12 to 17 at 184.8 per 1,000 in 1993, the peak year for juvenile homicide. By 2022, that figure had fallen to 27.4 per 1,000, an 85% decline over 29 years. The homicide victimization rate for children under age 14 peaked in 1993 at 2.2 per 100,000 per FBI Supplementary Homicide Reports data, and has declined since. The fear that drove the most consequential legal changes was specifically stranger abduction. The NIS MART2 study, conducted by David Finkelhor, Heather Hammer, and Andrea Sedlak, published by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention in October 2002, estimated approximately 115 cases of what the study called stereotypical kidnapping annually, abduction by a stranger or slight acquaintance involving transport, detention, or intent to keep. Of those 115, approximately 40% resulted in child death, roughly 46 deaths per year at statistical peak. The CDC estimates approximately 800 to 945 child drowning deaths per year, depending on age range. Drowning is the leading cause of death for American children ages 1 through 4. Swimming pools aren't banned. Their owners face no criminal liability comparable to a parent who leaves a child in a parked car for 10 minutes in one of the 19 states that now carry criminal penalty for that act. The legal architecture built to protect children from danger calibrated itself to the emotional weight of a specific type of tragedy, not to its statistical frequency. That emotional calibration had specific ignition points. Eitan Pates disappeared from Lower Manhattan on May 25, 1979, at age 6. Adam Walsh was abducted from a Sears store in Hollywood, Florida, on July 27, 1981, at age 6. His remains were found 2 weeks later. 13 months after that, Congress passed the Missing Children Act. In 1984 came the Missing Children's Assistance Act and the founding of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. By September 1984, the Anderson Erickson Dairy in Des Moines became the first dairy to print missing children photos on milk cartons. By 1985, those photos appeared on tens of millions of cartons per month. The legislative and media response was extraordinary in speed. What Nismart 2 would later document was that the statistical frequency of the underlying event didn't match the architecture built around it. 5 more items, briefly. Candy cigarettes were sold as standard candy inventory through the 1980s without organized objection. Children rode horses on weekends without helmets and without any safety mandate. The 1980s school playground, the metal jungle gym over asphalt or compacted gravel, the metal slide reaching surface temperatures capable of burns in direct August sunlight, the merry-go-round with no speed restriction, would fail every current ASTM and CPSC playground safety standard and most liability reviews. On long car trips, parents gave children antihistamine-containing motion sickness medication. The sedating effect was known, accepted, and unremarkable. And by 1985, 69.9% of women with children ages 6 to 13 were employed, per Bureau of Labor Statistics data. Their children came home to an empty house, let themselves in with a house key on a string around their neck, and managed 2 hours alone before a parent arrived. The key was stamped metal. It was also a philosophy, a decision about what children were capable of, pressed into their hands every morning at the school door. There are roughly 30 states where what happened in that F-150 on Saturday morning in 1983 is now a citable offense. There are 19 states where leaving a child alone in a parked car for 10 minutes carries criminal liability. The non-fatal violent victimization rate for children ages 12 to 17 has fallen 85% since 1993, a decline that preceded and continued alongside the laws, rather than starting with them. The children in the back of that truck are in their 40s and 50s now. They are fine. They have their own children who have never ridden in the bed of a truck, who have never thrown a lawn dart, who have never walked home from school alone. Their children are safe. They are also inside. And outside, the streetlights came on an hour ago, and nobody is coming home to them. Subscribe for more stories like this.